Hello and welcome to bhavinjani.com. My name is Bhavin and today we'll look at how to apply some basic settings to an image to make it look better. I like to see myself as an artist when I click images. Someone who creates great images of landscapes, destinations, people and events that others may look at and say, wow, I wish I was there, or what a great image. Unless you are a journalist photographer or an accident insurance photographer, where your primary job is to provide visual representation of the scene in front of you. You have all the liberty in the world to start with a blank canvas and paint any scene you want to, with your camera and an editing application as your tools, as long as you are not misrepresenting facts. It's interesting when I see budding photographers put images online to showcase their photography skills and proudly label them as ROTC, right out of the camera. I'm sure as they grow in their photography career, they will soon realize the naivety of their statement. Photo editing is an integral part of making great images and its use is limited only by your imagination. Lightroom and many other similar image editing tools provide for various types of adjustments to edit your image. In my opinion, images need to be edited for two primary reasons. The first one is to correct the image in terms of exposure, color and framing mostly. And the second one is to enhance the image by adding your own artistic touch to it. So let's get started. I have some images here with me in Lightroom and let's see what we can do about them. Let's go to the develop module, and if you do not see the top bar, click on this icon here and click on develop. That's where all the magic happens. You can also go to the develop module by selecting an image and pressing the D key on your keyboard. So for example, if I come back to my library module and I select this image, I am now pressing D on my keyboard and I am suddenly taken to the develop module. As you can see here, there are a lot of tabs in the develop module, and the ones that I consider to be as basic corrections lie within the basic tab, lens correction and effects. So here is the first image and let's see how we can improve it and make it look better. I'll go into the basic tab, and as you can see, the image is fairly underexposed, which means it's fairly dark and you cannot make out a lot of things that are in the image. So let's start by increasing the exposure, which will add brightness to the image. I select the exposure slide and move it to the right, and as you can see, it is adding a lot of brightness to the image, and I think somewhere here is fine. Okay, I can see the pavement in the front, I can see the water of the Ganges, and I can see the hills in the background. So this is an image from a town called Rishikesh, which is on the banks of the river Ganges in the Himalayas. As I increase the exposure, you would notice that all the areas of the image become equally bright. However, the clouds and the sky, which were bright enough to start with, have become even more brighter, and we are losing some detail in the clouds, which means that they are being washed out. We would hence like to have a setting which impacts not just the complete image but only small portions of it. And this is what the highlights and the shadows slider do. The highlights impacts only those areas which are fairly bright, and the shadows impacts only those areas which are fairly dark. So I now want to bring back the details that I've lost from the bright areas here in the sky. I'm going to select the highlight slider and move it to the left. And as you look at the sky and the clouds, you will notice that a lot of details are coming back. Only those bright portions are being impacted when I move this. And to demonstrate this, let me take it to the extreme left. And as you can see, most of the image is not impacted by the movement of the slider. I'm taking it to the extreme right and only the top area is impacted. I'm taking it to the extreme left and only the top area again is impacted, because that is the bright area and that is what the highlights slider impacts. I will bring it down somewhere till here until I think it looks fairly okay. Then I'll go to the shadow slider. Here I want to increase the amount of brightness and bring back a little more detail in the shadows or the dark area, which again is this greater portion of the mountains. I'm going to move the shadows slider to the right and continue to do that until I think I've got good exposure for the dark areas. Again, just to demonstrate what area of the image is impacted, I'll move it to the extreme right. And as you can see, primarily the areas which are dark and in the shadows of the hills are the ones that are impacted. I'll bring it to the extreme left, and again it's only that area which turns completely dark. The pavement is still fairly visible. So I'm going to probably take it somewhere here and let it rest. Okay. So we have made a few adjustments by increasing the exposure and regaining some details in the highlights and shadow area. Let's do a rain check and see where we have reached compared to where we had started from. I can do a quick comparison between the current status of the image and the before view by pressing on the backslash key on my keyboard. I press backslash, and as you can see, the image turns to its original version, which is fairly dark and completely underexposed. And this is the current view that we have. And we have made a lot of progress. A good way to compare before and after is also to go down to the toolbar here, onto these Y symbols, and click on it. And it will give you a side-by-side comparison of the before and the after images. The same comparison can be seen in different ways by clicking this triangle here. And if you do not want two images but want to get a split view, here is one single image, the left half as the before and the right half as after the editings have been applied. If you want to see before and after in a top bottom position, click on it again, and the last option, before and after top bottom split. So here the top portion of the image is before the editings were applied, and this is after the editings have been applied, and you can see there is a big difference. I'll go back to my single image view. You can also view this comparison by pressing the Y key on your keyboard, and I'll just demonstrate that. Y before and after, and I'm back to my current status. Okay, we have applied some adjustments to the image and made it fairly brighter, where we can clearly see the bright areas and the dark areas, and the image seems to have good exposure. However, the image still looks a little bit of dull and boring, I would say. The image needs a little bit of contrast, and we have a slider called contrast. Let's see what it does. If I move it to the right, you will notice subtle changes happening to the image where contrast is being introduced, which means the dark areas are becoming darker and the bright areas are becoming brighter. Let me take it to the extreme right, and now you will get an idea of what this slider does. While you edit images, it's always a good idea to take each slider to its extreme left and right to see the impact of that slider, and it will help you understand it better. This is a little too extreme for my taste. I'm going to bring it back somewhere here. Most professional photographers avoid the contrast slider and use a few other different techniques to bring in contrast to the image, which is what makes the image look really attractive. Another way to bring in contrast is to use the whites and the blacks slider. Let's go to the white slider and move it to the right. What it does is it brightens only the white areas of the image, and that impact is very subtle. It's making some specific areas of the image whiter and brighter. The black slider impacts only the dark areas of the image and makes them blacker, and hence the blacks and the whites slider worked together basically bring in contrast to your image. When we use these sliders to bring in contrast, we also want to ensure that we do not lose any details in either the white areas or the black areas. To ensure that we have not overdone the white by taking it to an extreme end, a good way to check is to hold onto the Option or the Alt key on your keyboard and then click on the white slider, and you will see that your image is transformed into an almost black screen with some white and colorful dots on it. The white and the colorful dots indicate those regions in your image where the white portions are probably washed out and hence there are no details available. Hence I usually do not scroll the slider beyond a point where I see a lot of white dots on my screen. And I know that the region being washed out or overexposed is in the sky portion, and I'm going to slightly bring it down until maybe just a few dots exist, and I'll leave it there. This ensures that there is no portion in my image which is completely washed out. Similarly, I'll go to the black slider and I'll hold down the Options or the Alt key on my keyboard and click on the black slider, and this works exactly opposite to the white slider. Most of my screen is white and only small portions have some colorful or black dots on it. These dots indicate those areas which have turned completely black and hence I have lost details. I do not want that. So I'm going to move up my black slider and remove these colorful areas until I think that it's okay to be till here. Let's see what these colorful areas indicate, and let me show them to you once again. I'm holding the Alt or the Option key on my keyboard and clicking on the black slider. There are some colorful areas on the left and in the center portion on the right. Keep that in mind. I'll go back to the image and show you what those areas are. And let me zoom in here. So these areas have turned completely black and hence there is no detail visible here. We know that there are trees but we cannot figure them out. Similarly on the left, this is the area where we could see some colorful dots, and we know that we have leaves here, but again these areas are lost out because it appears as a complete patch of black. You should try to avoid having completely black or completely white areas in your image, otherwise you will lose details in those regions. Let me zoom out on my image. Okay, so as you can see, we have got a good exposure. We have also introduced a little bit of contrast. However, we can still do a little more to this image, and for that we'll go down to this section which says presence. The sliders here add a little bit of clarity and color to your image. The first slider, clarity, move it to the right, and it introduces something called local contrast, which makes your image a little more sharper, and it may not be visible when you are completely zoomed out, but hold on for a moment as I zoom in into a particular portion into the hills, and I'm going to probably rest here, and I'm going to move my clarity slider to the extreme right, and look at how suddenly a lot of definition is coming out in your trees. You can see the outline of the trees and you can see their shapes. Let me move back my clarity slider to its original position by double clicking on it, and as you will notice, we have lost some of that clarity and sharpness and definition. If I move the clarity slider to the extreme left, it will in fact make the image a little more smoother. So the clarity slider has its own use when you want to bring in clarity and definition, or when you want to lose clarity and definition, and we'll probably see that in another image. For now, I'm going to move the clarity slider to the right and let it rest somewhere here in between. Adding a lot of clarity also makes the image look patchy, which is what we do not want. Let me zoom back, and as you can see, it has brought in a lot of definition to your image. The clouds are little well defined, the hills and some of the details in it are well defined, and so is the pavement at the front. The next two sliders, vibrance and saturation, enhance the colors in the image. Saturation enhances all the colors throughout your image, and at times it may look good, but in most cases it oversaturates your colors because you may not want to enhance all the colors. I will increase the saturation to some extent, say bring it to around 20-22 here, and it has a subtle impact on the image. However, it's the vibrance slider that is most used to enhance only those colors which are very dull to start with. So for example, the pink here is slightly dull, the blue in the sky is fairly dull relative to the other colors, and when I move the vibrance slider, it is these two colors that primarily get impacted. Blue becomes fairly saturated and so does the pink color. I do not want to take it this far, so I'm going to move it back and I'm going to let it rest somewhere here. Well, let's do a before after compare and see how far we have come. I'm going to press the backslash key, and this is your original image that we started out with, and this is where we have come. As you can see, the image is looking much better than it was. Let's also do a side-by-side comparison, and here you can clearly see there is a big difference and the image looks much more attractive. Okay, let me close the basic tab. There are two more tabs that I mentioned which fall, say, under the basic category of adjustments. One of them is lens correction. In fact, for most of my edits, I like to start with lens correction. This is an adjustment that I apply to all my images at the time of importing them by setting up a preset. Every type of lens introduces some distortion or the other to your image in the form of vignette by making the corners or the edges of your image slightly dark, or in the form of chromatic aberration, which is basically colorful lines at points where you have strong contrast. So if you look at these leaves which are positioned against a bright sky, there are pink or magenta lines and some green lines around it. These lines are called chromatic aberration, and most lenses have them. And one more thing that lenses introduce, especially wide angle lenses, is something called barrel distortion, where vertical or horizontal straight lines appear curved. All these types of lens distortions can easily be corrected by going into the lens correction tab and checking here and here. I'll uncheck them and show you the impact of both. The first one says remove chromatic aberration. For that, I'm going to zoom into these leaves once again, and you will see this pink, magenta and the green lines on either side of the leaves, and keep an eye on them and watch what happens when I check remove chromatic aberration. Voila, these lines have suddenly disappeared. I'll uncheck and I'll check on it once again. So this is a quick way to remove chromatic aberration. I'll zoom out of the image and I'll check on enable profile corrections. Keep an eye on the image and you'll suddenly notice that the vignette it had at all the four corners is suddenly gone, and the image also suddenly appears to have shifted a bit. Keep an eye on it. I'm going to uncheck and check on enable profile corrections. I'll uncheck and check on it. Uncheck. As you can see, the edge of this pavement appears slightly curved, and when I click on enable profile corrections, it becomes straighter. So such a curvature appears in a lot of straight vertical and horizontal lines because of limitations of the lens and can be easily corrected through Lightroom. Also, if you notice, when I click on enable profile corrections, it automatically detects the manufacturer of my lens and the type of lens, and any distortion that is introduced by this lens is automatically corrected by selecting this option. And then the last adjustment that I use a lot falls under effects, and this is called vignette. The same thing that we removed by enabling profile correction, I would want to introduce that vignette, but I would want to be able to control it. So I'm going to get hold of this slider which says amount, and I'm going to move it to the left. And as you can see, it introduces a shadow around the edges of the image and it leaves the center portion slightly brighter, which means that the viewer's attention is drawn towards the center of the image. I will pull down this slider to the extreme left so that you can get an idea of how a vignette looks like, and this is too much for my taste. I'm going to pull back and I'm going to leave it somewhere here. Well, we just had a look at some of the basic adjustments in Lightroom that can help you correct your image and make it look better. Let's do a final comparison between the original image and what we have now in front of us. I'm going to go to the toolbar and do a before and after comparison. To get a better view, I'm also going to remove all the panels that I have on my screen by pressing down the shift and the tab keys. And as you can see, the image on the left is where we started with and the image on the right is where we have ended with. With this video, I hope you now have some understanding of how to apply basic settings to your images and make them look better. If there is anything I have left out or you would like to know more, please write it in the comment section below. If you found this video helpful, I request you to press the like button below and to subscribe to my channel to get more videos on photography. I'm going to be creating a lot of videos on how to use Lightroom and Photoshop to make your images stand out. So if you want to get updates when these videos get created, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you for your time and I wish you all the best.